Hey there everybody, Coach Mark Estrabio here, and before we dive into today's topic, make sure to find me over on Instagram as Coach Mark Estrabio. Also, I offer one-to-one coaching. It's what I do full-time, and the odds are very good. I would love to work with you. But with that being said, let's get into it. So in today's video, I'll be talking all about my athlete Mara and her 5th place finish at Strongman Nationals, really diving into how we trained her and adapted the programming around her to help her be successful despite some unique limitations and restrictions. Strongman Corp Nationals this year consisted of 6 events across 3 days. On day 1, it started with a max overhead press off of blocks. Then it was a deadlift medley where you would do 3 reps with a deadlift bar, 2 reps on an axle with wagon wheels, and then max quality reps off of a silver dollar deadlift. And then your third and final event on day 1 was the seated rope hoist, which was approximately 25 feet of rope, just reeling it in. Then on day 2, we started with the worst event out there, the circus dumbbell. I don't know why this event keeps showing up in shows. I'm so sick of programming for it. Then it was a frame carry for max distance where you would just accumulate as many 30-foot trips as you could within the time frame. And then last but not least, a keg over bar for reps. So I do want to take a moment and talk a bit about Mara herself. She decided to hire me on specifically in light of Strongman Corp Nationals, and she does have a bit of a history here. She had previously torn her right rotator cuff, so as a result of that, movements such as flat barbell bench press and back squats were simply a no-go. They caused way too much discomfort, and as a result, we couldn't even get much overload out of them. So instead, we focused on lower incline to vertical pressing, as well as front squat variations that would maximize her carryover. Additionally, she self-reported a deadlift weakness, so in her training, one of the big things we emphasized was just plain getting her 1 rep max up, recognizing how heavy the loads were at Nationals relative to her capabilities when we started this training cycle. On top of that, we also dumped in a lot of shoulder stability work, which I'll get into further as we break down the event-by-event process. Now, when it comes time to specifically train for a strongman show or powerlifting or any competition thereof, one of the big things I believe in is we want to take a top-down approach. We first want to look at what the specific show requires of the athlete, and then we work backwards from there to arrive at a progression and program that is appropriate for the athlete. Whereas in the off-season, what we want to do is build the best possible all-around athlete. That way they're more able to stand the rigors of competition-specific peaking. A good way of looking at it is when it comes time to peak, we are jamming a square peg into a round hole. However, in the off-season, we're building the best possible square peg to work with. So how that worked in execution was we worked backwards from what the events were, and then it was a matter of finding movements and methods that best served progress while keeping her in one piece. A few key elements of this were across our 12-week prep, we separated it into 3 distinct 4-week phases. Soreness, pain, mood, and energy dictated load progressions, volume adjustments week in, week out, as it should be with any sort of coaching progression. And then one of the big things I focused in on was not so much hyperfixating on the peak of her strength, but actually raising the floor of her capabilities. That way, if there were flare-ups or she was having an off day, we weren't caught on the back foot and trying to make up lost ground. Additionally, when it came to non-event movements, one of the big things we selected for was maximal carryover to the events by building the necessary physical attributes. So for the first event, which was the max overhead off of the blocks, one of the big things we emphasized was not just pure pressing power, but making sure she had a ton of leg drive. Because Mara makes use of a jerk technique, we wanted to make sure that the legs were dialed in. A jerk is not just a push press. There's a lot of timing element involved, and your legs are the primary driver of getting the weight moving, whereas your arms are there to stabilize and finish the terminal end of the range of motion. One of the big things we did here was we ran waves of push presses and jerks. We kept a lot of the work in the 70 to 85% range to build a reliable daily minimum of capability. Seated strict press work such as dumbbells without back support also gave her additional volume without flaring up her shoulder, and then we added in some one-arm work for general stability as well as transference to the circus dumbbell later in her prep. The front squats themselves, we used all sorts of variations here depending on emergent patterns and what I felt she needed. Things such as pause triples, contrast sets where she would go from pause into a speed rep, as well as 1.5 rep front squats to help her get a more controlled dip drive for her push jerk on the barbell. They weren't the main dish, but they made the rack position a lot stronger and more stable. That way she could set up faster and waste less time getting into position, because any second you spend on an event is energy expended. Efficiency breeds excellence. Now, in terms of approaching the deadlift, we started with a much more basic approach, something such as 4 sets of 3 to 4 with the barbell deadlift, ramping up across. I really wanted to see how she responded to a simpler, more basic progression, as well as build a base of both confidence and competence with the movement before we got overly complicated with its programming. The main tool we used here to drive progress in later waves was the superset. We would go from barbell deadlifts into axle pulls off of the wagon wheels, done back to back. That way we weren't just building her raw strength, but also the conditioning necessary as well as setting up better transitions. Every week she got better and smoother at shifting these setups while under fatigued. We didn't hammer super hard in terms of accessories. We used a lot of things such as tempo and paused RDLs to make her own that bottom position as well as set a better hip height across the variations. Sessions were tough, but they built control without leaving her wrecked. And this is one of the most underrated things I think in general when it comes to deadlift training is training better control. Eccentric control is not just there for hypertrophy application, but it helps you learn better hip height for stronger starts. And another little thing we did here, kind of a tweak, is when we were training for the hoist event, that hand over hand, we also had her push the sled away thereafter, because that sled push helped build additional posterior chain strength and work capacity that carried over into the deadlift, so that conditioning work helped feed the deadlift indirectly. As a result of this, her pulls not only got stronger, but also a lot more consistent. As a result of this, she also hit a lifetime PR on the deadlift, finally dieting off 3 plates in prep, so congratulations. Now for event 3, the seated hoist, one of the big things we focused in on here, recognizing this was probably the strangest event on the Nationals card, we couldn't fully replicate the pulley system in training, so we got creative. We used a heavy rope sled pull as our primary driver here, as it was the same overall mechanical movement, just at a slightly different angle. She would sit and just pull that sled in, hand over hand for distance, and then immediately after pushing the sled back, as I had alluded to earlier, because this made the drill twice as valuable. The pull simulated the hoist, while the push built leg drive and posterior chain endurance that carried over on the deadlift, as well as helping build her for the moving events. Now, I'd say the real value here came in the accessories we selected to help build the support for this. Her program always had rows, hammer curls, and isometric holds baked in, and they weren't just filler. One of the big things they were chosen for was to build pulling endurance and protect her from repetitive strain. Slow eccentric curls gave her bicep tendon health, isometrics built durability in her posterior chain muscles, and the rows layered in that upper back capacity so the rope never overloaded one joint. We also leaned really heavily on behind the back axle shrugs as they trained grip and upper back endurance at angles that would help improve her for this event. Plus, it's just one of those movements, that behind the back shrug. Building your grip with it is a great way to get stronger hands without generating too much fatigue, which would also carry over to her frame carry later in the show. Starting off on day 2 was the absolute low point of the competition, the circus dumbbell. You know it, I hate it. It often gets mislabeled as a press, but for a lot of lifters, it's best described as a throw and catch, more of a jerk type exercise. It's a whole body movement, so we really wanted to emphasize that whole body strength and coordination throughout. Our main exposure here was using stuff such as EMOM work, 1 or 2 reps on the minute at 60 to 70 pounds, and this gave her rhythm and conditioning to treat the comp weight like just another rep. We also topped off with a lot of strict pressing work here, especially with dumbbells. As a side note, in general, I don't have people train the circus dumbbell on their non-competition arm, as it's been my experience the time invested is not really worth it. Instead, tacking on extra sets with something such as a strict dumbbell press or other movement is a great way to help keep it more even between the non-comp arms, plus you help reduce that risk factor of dropping the circus dumbbell on your head or foot. So by Nationals, Mara was actually feeling pretty darn confident with this event, and she was able to rack up the reps without cooking herself or getting hurt. And horrifyingly enough, she even said she's actually grown to like the circus dumbbell. Also, promoters, please, for the love of God, stop putting the circus dumbbell in every other freaking show. Now, when it came time for the frame carry, much like the hoist event here, we built a very wide base of physical capability for this using a targeted accessory work. The behind the back axle shrugs, as I had mentioned earlier, helped build a lot of upper back endurance and grip strength, which had transference, as well as just keeping the elbows healthy with stuff such as slow eccentric hammer curls, as well as unilateral trunk work such as suitcase deadlifts, and then some single leg work as well. Then it was just a matter of taking all these physical attributes and building her skill by simply doing repeated 30-foot carries with a trap bar, as we did not have access to the frame outright. But this had grip, stability, and conditioning baked in, so then come competition day, she was able to handle the frame with both confidence and competence. Last but not least was our final event of the competition, the keg load here. Now, as far as training for this event, much like the other more specialized events, we did a lot of skill work with the primary implements, and then we built the relevant physical attributes up using secondary accessory movements. So for her actual keg and sandbag loading work, we tended to alternate between them just to give her joints a bit of a break, but we also alternated between heavy loading as well as stuff such as EMOM or timed sets. I think the EMOM structure was probably the most valuable thing we did in her training prep. Think 8 to 12 sets of 2 reps done every minute atop the minute. What this did is it allowed her to essentially shut off her brain and build that unconscious flow state where she could do the reps on autopilot. And then by adding in timed sets late in prep, what that did for her was it let her harness that unconscious flow and accelerate it, go into that 11th gear so she could get more reps come competition day, building that strength, that conditioning. And then when it came to accessory work, movements such as isometric glute bridges and Superman's really valuable here to help build low back endurance. That way when she was getting that triple extension to get over the bar, she was perched in a good position and each rep wouldn't take so much out of her. We rounded that out with movements such as the behind the back shrug to help build grip endurance as well as hammer curls for her elbow health. As a result of this, she wasn't just ready to load a keg, but ultimately she was conditioned to attack it rep in and rep out, coupled with that posterior chain endurance that we had built. Now what you have here is a snapshot of what her training looked like in the later stage of prep. Day 1 was her deadlift rehearsal day. We trained the medley directly, barbell pulls into the axle pulls thereafter. This let her practice that transition under fatigue. RDLs on top of that layered in some control. They built the hinge pattern without crushing her joints or running her into the ground. Then some behind the back shrugs, grips and traps like I've talked about quite a bit. And then Superman isos and rows tied the session together with posterior chain endurance and back stability. Trunk work is criminally underrated when it comes to improving your capabilities on moving events. Now, day 2 was our overhead dominant day here, so we focused heavily on her competition push jerk, getting her exposure to both the timing, leg drive, as well as not crushing her with max effort loads week in, week out, but just making sure we developed the skill so that the reps were highly efficient. We kept that same thread going with her circus dumbbell work where we used EMOMs to give her that repeated comp practice, one clean and press at the top of every minute. This is a lot of quality work done in a relatively short amount of time, and it's something you've heard me talk about extensively on this channel, is the idea of density being paramount for the strongman athlete, being able to condense a lot of work in a relatively short amount of time. Then after that was just some strict overhead work with both the barbell and dumbbells. This helped kind of fill any gaps in terms of her overall development, as well as keep things a bit more balanced. Then it was shoulder health work after this, with movements such as a neutral grip lat pull down and trap 3 raises for scap stability and vertical pulling balance. Now day 3, we heavily focused in on her front rack position and upper body stability. Contrast front squats were something we used here where she would do 1 rep with a pause and then the next rep would be done for speed. This allowed her to learn how to hold the position even when tired, but also learn how to accelerate when tired, both of which are critically important for a strongman athlete. We not only need to be able to take good positions, but also hold and reclaim good positions as fatigue mounts. We also did circus dumbbell EMOMs again here, but this time we did them a bit lighter to drill more skill and confidence. And then we topped off with some one-arm dumbbell press to help balance her things out. And then, of course, some more trap raises and face pulls to keep the shoulder healthy and build that upper back strength. Again, a very simple day on paper, but it was crucial for keeping her both upright underneath the bar and dumbbell, as well as stable in moving events. We also did a little tricep kickback work here just for a bit more lockout power. Now, day 4 was her heavy event-focused day here. We started with silver dollar height deadlifts to give her direct exposure to the third pull of the medley, and then trap bar carries stood in for the frame, long sets with resets every 30 feet to mimic competition pacing. Then it was the sled, pull, and push combo, which again doubled as both hoist practice as well as building her posterior chain and overall conditioning. And then as far as loading goes, we again used that EMOM type structure. Short rest, this gave her exactly what the event demanded, and then topping off with stability work such as hammer curls with the slow eccentric. Again, this wasn't for vanity, though big biceps is important to her. We want to make sure that she could handle all the pull and loading volume, and that's why we had these curls. Ultimately, if you look at this week on the whole, you'll see that every single day served a very clear purpose. Rehearsal of event flow, building strength without excessive joint strain, and layering in durability. It's the clearest example of how an emergent approach works when it comes to training someone for strongman. It's not about being random, but about working backwards from the necessary demands of the show so the athlete can rise to meet them. And that right there is probably the big thesis of this entire video, is the emergent approach. No single template would have worked for Mara. Her medical history, training performance, and odd mix of events demanded a tailored solution. For overhead, we treated the presses more like a jerk, and then we rounded out with supplemental strict work for her stability. we protected her shoulder capsule with weekly circuits of stability work. For the deadlift medley, we focused in on skill and transition practice while also chasing higher overall limit strength capability. That way, she was able to get through the medley. And then ultimately, accessories weren't filler. They built a wider foundation of necessary physical attributes to be successful in the events. Programming was a big blend of rehearsal, progression, and athlete-specific workarounds. And again, ultimately, just focus in on working backwards from a competition and then adapting it to yourself as an athlete, and that is a winning strategy to help you be successful in the sport of strongman. And that's how we got Mara to 5th place at Strongman Nationals. So that wraps up today's video. I really appreciate you watching this far. If you could, make sure to hit like for me. Comment down below if there's any topics you'd like to see me cover. The best topics are ones I will turn into future videos down the road. But that's all I've got for you folks. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time.